Hello, everybody. Yeah, I'm Franz Spohn, and I have been working with Faber-Castell for quite some time, and I'm very familiar with their products. And the reason I do that is I love them. They are really very premium. You get fabulous results for them. So we've got Polychromos pencils, we have Albrecht Dürer pencils, we have Albrecht Dürer watercolor markers, and I want to talk a little bit about the properties of each one by themselves, and then we'll do a project kind of at the end where we do a multimedia project, and then you can see how they all work. Now, of course, the Albrecht Dürer watercolor markers come in 30 colors. The Polychromos and the Albrecht Dürer pencils come in 120, but obviously we couldn't include those in your sample kit. So I tried to find a variety of colors that you could mix and match in order to make more than one color, and we'll go over that a little bit. But the examples that I have to show involve using more colors, but I think that just to get started with the basic set, we'll be okay with that. And I also wanted to talk a little bit about my work very quickly, so you have an idea of where I am based. Let's go to the overhead so I can show you these things. Okay, so this is kind of an example in my sketchbook of what I like doing with imagery. It's much more character-based. I like, kind of exploring the way, like in this case, the different poses of alligators. And if I come up with one that I really like, I'll add color either with the Albrecht Dürer watercolor pencils or the pens or whatever. Again, it's just more of kind of like horsing around and having more fun than I should legally be allowed to have. So this is what I like doing the best. I think I have one other page here I wanted to show you. Oh yeah, something like this. This kind of gives you an idea of what happens when somebody is selected for coloring, as well as this little maniac here. So this is how I draw all the time. I walk around with I have this little sketchbook, especially I've got a black pen, also Faber-Castell, which is fabulous. We'll talk about that a little bit, just as an auxiliary thing you might consider. But this is the way that I usually work. Now, on the other hand, I know that a lot of people are very obsessed with being realistic, and I can do that as well. And I find it a challenge for me because I am more apt to being totally intuitive, and I don't necessarily, maybe I'll do a couple representative drawings the first time I attempt something just so I get an idea of how all the parts go together. And then all that information goes in my brain and rolls around, and then it comes out as I showed you. So originally, I was going to do this workshop way back in October, but unfortunately, there was a traffic accident and we had to cancel it. And so we went from doing cowboys to doing this figure. Okay. And originally, as you'll see in the drawing when I show you, he had an Easter egg. This is like an egg cup I had when I was in kindergarten, and I've always liked it. Had like a little hat. So if you had a soft-boiled egg, you put it in there and the hat would keep it warm. But I liked it because, it's a realistic object, but it has a bit of whimsy. And that is something that I'm the most interested in, is trying to get that more of a joyous look out of my art. So I thought, okay, we'll do a rendering of this. So you can see, unfortunately, when I was transporting it, it broke. The egg broke. So instead, since it's Christmas, I thought we could substitute a Christmas ornament. So he'll fit in like that. It looks like he's wearing like a little stocking cap. And so that you can kind of use him as a reference, we'll move the old shell out. I guess it's a good analogy for coming into the new year. I'm going to try to get it so that, let's see if we can get this to work. I don't know if that will there. Well, maybe you can get an idea of how it would go in, but this way you get a better view of what this is. Okay, this is my finished drawing of the guy. And here's the cloth that I used as kind of a Here, maybe, yeah, maybe if we do this, we can get the, we'll go ahead and put him like that. And maybe be able to get the, there, that'll work. I broke this right when I was carrying him over the table, the egg, so, okay. Well, I don't want to waste our time too much trying to get some still life thing together here. Okay, that's close enough. Then I'll put it where you can see it. Okay, so this is my rendering of this particular figure. You know, he's standing up. I obviously did it when I had the egg. I like putting cloth backgrounds, and especially if they have a pattern, because it kind of helps build up the space. You get a feeling for these kind of wrinkly guys and a little edge here. And it also helps in getting the light to create an environment. So you can kind of see where the highlights are here, a couple, you know, really bright ones on the nose, and, you know, very shiny, as you can tell. And then this is very much in kind of shadow and faded color. And then where it's the brightest light, you have the intense color. So those are, you know, just kind of general principles of drawing that will really help you out. Now, before I ever get to this stage, I do a whole slew of little drawings that are not necessarily totally right on top of it in terms of being realism. I had a couple more, but you know, not really. I guess it don't make sense. Oh, I know where it is. It's in my sketchbook. Sorry, I've got too many things all in one place here. Hold on. Yeah, I even marked it specifically. Okay, so you know, I try it in a couple different styles. This is a much more kind of illustration style. This is also more kind of like a more towards a realistic kids book style. And of course, since it's in my sketchbook, I never can resist like having a chicken wondering what happened to her egg or something like that. Who knows what the story is? So I'll do all these preliminary drawings first to kind of try to figure out how to do it. Now that's more of kind of telling you about, you know, how to draw rather than how to use the particular materials. But I thought it would be of interest just to kind of see what the range is, what you can do with these materials. Now, once I got this done, I thought, well, if I wanted to kind of recreate doing something that is a little more realistic, I ended up tracing it. After I finished the drawing, I traced it so I could get it on another piece of paper so I could do another one in the demo. So you can kind of see how I went from something like this to that. And for those that are maybe beginners, one thing you could do once you come up with, you know, kind of a drawing, if you want to transfer it to another piece of paper, you can trace it on tracing paper. I don't know if you can see that. And then you can take Faber-Castell. I meant to bring one to show you, but they make these solid crayons with a 9B graphite. It's extremely soft. And so that when you have it on the back, when you put it down, you tape it, then as you trace, it transfers the line onto the paper. And then this is a kneaded eraser. If I thought since it's Christmas time, I would pick a red one. These are Faber-Castell as well. And they call it a kneaded eraser because you knead it. And as you work it, it makes it a little more pliable. And there's a slight stickiness to it. So whether you're using these drawing pencils, graphite, whatever, what I like to do is once I have transferred graphite to a piece of paper, I like going over it with my kneaded eraser to really minimize the impact of that line. And if you had the patience, but it's kind of a waste of good pigment, you could completely color the back of your tracing with a Polychromos color close to what you want there. But then that's kind of using your really good colored pencil for something that could be done just as well with graphite. Okay, let's start with a Polychromos and talk about these first. Okay, we've got a yellow, red, and a blue. And what I want to first do to kind of spotlight one of the features of Faber-Castell, the pigments that they use are called color indexed. And what that means is that if you have any material that they make, if you pick out, this is a number, you have a 219 scarlet red pencil. And so that's in the Polychromos. It's also in the Albrecht Dürer, and it's also in the Albrecht Dürer marker. And what that means is that we'll start on some of these stripes here. Okay, so if I want to start to put some color down someplace, and I'd like to keep, a little texture, something like that, and I want it to be nice and solid, but look like a color pencil, I can do that. Well, let's say that I'm kind of coming up over and through, let's see, what do we got? Let's say on his body, I'll take, now I guess the comparison would be better if we put them straight. Okay, with this, in fact, I'll tell you what's even better. Let's just do it on the back. Okay, so here is the Polychromos. And I can kind of fade it out a little bit. Now, when you draw with color pencils, or the graphite for that matter, I encourage you not to hold your pencil like you're writing somebody a letter, okay? You have a lot more control over it if you kind of hold it near the end and you think about this being the fulcrum, and you can put very light pressure. And if I'm doing very light pressure, then I get very little traces of the pigment on the paper. The Stonehenge paper, real quick word about Stonehenge paper. It's really important. It doesn't necessarily have to be Stonehenge, but you want to make sure that when you're doing your finished pieces, you put it on a good piece of paper. It's like the foundation of your drawing. So why go all the effort in putting your whole heart into a drawing and have it just kind of fall apart after a period of time? So make sure that you get a good quality paper, and to begin with, newsprint, stuff like that is okay to practice on. But, at some point, you really want to get accustomed to being able to use a good piece of paper without wincing and thinking, oh, I can't make a mistake. Yeah, you can make a mistake because you get erasers and stuff like that. But at any rate, there is a grain of this paper. And so if I hold my pencil this way, whether it's a watercolor pencil or a Polychromos or graphite, if I don't put very much pressure on it, it hardly puts anything down there. But then as I increase pressure, you can see that. So you really have a good range of how much pigment put down on the paper. Okay, now this is the Albrecht Dürer pencil. And as you'll see, as I put this right next to that one, I can pretty much do the same thing with this. And it's almost as if this itself, you could use just as a color pencil. I'll go over it again. And that's the other thing too, is a lot of times, if you want to, you can put a little bit down, then go over it again, then go over it again, and then go over it again. It gets darker and darker, and then you can lighten it up. So when you look at that, you really would not be able to tell that this is a Polychromos color pencil, which, by the way, is oil-based. It's an oil-based pigmented lead for the pencil, and this is a water-soluble, but it's the same pigment. So when you look at those two, they're the same. Now, what's fun, though, with the Albrecht Dürer is that you have the additional, this is a water brush that I find very handy. You could use regular, if you have good sable watercolor brushes, they work, whatever. But as soon as the moment I hit this with water, it turns into watercolor. Here, let me, there, okay. Now you don't have the reflection, but you can see how juicy that is. I mean, that is as full-blown watercolor as if you were using pans. And so you could do this on a scrap piece of paper and then decide that you're going to add it to your drawing without actually having a pencil on the paper, or you can do what I did here and put the pigment down on the paper and then go over it with a water brush. Now, just as a little handy tip for travelers, what I'll do is get a card or a scrap piece of paper about the size of, like a credit card, so I can put it in my wallet. And then I'll make little individual areas of color with my watercolor pencils, my Albrecht Dürer pencils. And then if I have these in my wallet, once I get through security, fill up my water brush, and I've got my little sketchbook, then it's just, let me clean this for a minute. Okay, so then it's just a matter of like kind of using this like a watercolor pan. So if I've got, let's say I've done some kind of a drawing here. We'll do a little Christmas pig before he knows that he's going to be dinner. That's why he's smiling. So I could pick this up and then just kind of come through and act like a regular kind of watercolor. So it's very handy to be able to do something like this. And again, the explosion of color and pigment when you hit it with water is quite extraordinary, I think. All right, well, and then obviously we've got the either end, you either have a brush point or you have more of a bullet point. This is the same pigment as the Albrecht Dürer, but already has, the water applied to it, so it's already liquid. And so then I'm going to put this in through here. And then again, if I want to trail it out, it's just a matter of taking the water brush and then moving it down. And obviously with the liquid watercolor, it's very intense when it first comes out, maybe a little bit more so than what you can get from here. But then, I can kind of bolster it up. You can play each other against each other. So, if I want to, I could take, again, let's do the pig again. I can draw the image of the pig. I'll give him a little Santa hat. Okay, so then if I take, any of it, whether it's the watercolor marker or whether it's watercolor pencil, when I take this, it's the same pigment. So it's going to be appropriate to use as washes for this thing. But no matter how I go over the lines, they're not going to be changed because they're oil-based and this is water-based. So, that's, again, another thing. And it doesn't have to be necessarily the same color, but this is an example of using the Polychromos to get your image and then using the same color to get some washes if you want to give your figures a little bit more volume. Okay. So let's go back, though, to the Polychromos. And you might, I guess you didn't see because I was putting it off. This is our water cup. Okay. So it's got little scallops on it so that if you have a regular brush or even your water brush, it's very convenient to put it here, and it discourages you from deadheading your brush. That will ruin a brush if you let it sit in water with a weight on the brush head. So this is a great place to park your brushes in the process of when you're doing something. Okay. So, and they're collapsible so that they're like this, and then they pop out. But I also often use them to catch my shavings. Now, with good art pencils, you always want to use a hand sharpener. And the reason for that, the color pencils are about the softest pencils that you'll work with. And so an office pencil is a hard graphite, and so you can use an office machine to sharpen those because they're so hard. But then when you get to graphite, and especially when you get to color pencils, these are much softer. And so those machines will eat these up. And what they do is they produce a point that is really spiky. So a graphite pencil, if you have, especially if you have a special pencil sharpener for graphite, it will give you a point that's more blunt. I mean, it's still sharp, but the ratio between the height and the diameter is different. Like it's much more extreme here. It's much higher compared to its more narrow width. So the extra thickness here gives you more support, so you're not going to be breaking your lead all the time. And then with a color pencil and use a hand sharpener like this, then you get more of kind of, I think of golf pencils. They're more, it's a little extreme. It isn't quite like this, but it kind of makes the point, so to speak. So again, the base of where you're coming from here, once it leaves the wood, is much wider compared to the distance to the point. So hand sharpeners won't tear the wood up, and especially will give you a point that's more suitable that will prevent the pencil from breaking. Because if I would sharpen this in an office pencil sharpener, the first thing I do if I start to draw, it's going to spit that point halfway across the room, and it'll be hard to always have a sharp point. Okay, let's flip over just a scrap piece while we're kind of talking about the characteristics. Okay, the pencils are, the pigment themselves are very light fast. Faber-Castell makes sure that they use pigments that are light impervious and archival. And there's a system of rating the longevity of color relative to fading called the blue wool scale. And so the highest rating is 3, and most of the Polychromos, Albrecht pencils have a 3-star rating, so you can be sure that they're going to last, pretty much forever. So the pigment is high quality. It also is oil-based. Now, you might think, okay, oil-based, what does that mean? Well, the way that this is, the binder in here is an oil base, as opposed to other pencils that are wax-based. So the problem with the wax-based pencils is that once you start building up color, it's kind of hard to put another layer on top, because eventually what you're going to be doing with the pressure of your pencil is peeling more off the paper than you're putting on. With an oil base, I can start with my pencil. Again, I can get light areas, very sensitive to pressure, but I'm going to really build this up. I am now using enough pressure. I'm putting enough layering here that I'm really covering up. I'm even getting pigment down into the valleys of the paper. Okay, so now I'll take my yellow Polychromos. Now let's go a different direction. Now these pencils, the colors aren't totally opaque, and what's nice about them is that the more you go over, the more intense the color gets, but you can also use them to blend. So I don't know how well it shows up, in this situation, but this is starting to take on more of kind of an orangish cast. So if I wanted to create an orange, I could put, let me sharpen here real quick. Put a yellow down. And put that down solidly, and then I can take my red and I can go over it lightly. And so it creates a nice transparency here. So here's the red. It's a little bit lighter because I put a little pigment, and here's the yellow. And then I get the second coloration here that defines this shape. So it kind of starts creating visual, pictorial space, because like one is overlapping the other, not really sure which one is which. I can come back here and maybe make this a little bit darker to heighten that up, but you have a lot of options here because you can overlay these things. Okay, so you can get those kind of effects, and that really does look very transparent. Okay, so let's take our blue. Let's go on top. Now let's go over here where we have the thickest deposit. And you can see that it goes right on top of the other colors I already have, and it's not chipping off. I'm building that up. And so you could start getting some really nice color combinations. Like here's, again, let's put a kind of a light blue down. Not a horribly heavy application this time. And then you can put a little bit of red on top of that. And you actually do get more of a purplish overlap. And again, you get that little bit of red on either side. So there are lots of ways that you could take advantage of this in making things, foreground, background, detailed, not detailed. And then if we really want to do it again, we can put a little yellow on top of that. And I've got, all the other 120 colors. You can just keep on building up and up and up, and you don't have to worry about getting it to be too waxy. Now, for blending, you could do it physically, but there's also an opportunity. Let's take some red. And then we'll go over this with yellow, but then continue it here. So you've got a good concentration of red and yellow in an overlap. And then I put a little bit of baby oil in this little dish and a Q-tip. And now I can work that around and I can get it to blend. So I can go kind of from yellow and I can create the orange by blending it with a little bit of baby oil. Now, you'll have to let that dry. And obviously, though, it penetrates the fibers of the paper. So it's going to have a slightly different texture from now on. So you have to kind of keep that in mind, too. All right, let's move over to the Albrecht Dürer watercolor pens. So we got the three of them here. Again, you can work directly onto the paper. What I like about these is that, like, if you want to do like some kind of vegetation, I found this really helpful, that you could kind of make just the shape of the brush and just some nice energy with the way that you apply it. And get some kind of, in this case, petal effects. I find, especially with leaves, if we had, a green, well, yeah, I have one, even though you don't, but you could get one. It could be the same thing that, it's a nice way of kind of creating like more of maybe a tropical leaf or something like that. And it's just a matter of using the tool and the way that you create marks. And so these are very good, great marking tools. Plus, you can also draw lines with them. Now, as far as the magic, I can come back here now and I can start getting maybe some secondary leaves in there by just taking a water brush. You kind of think of the way that asters have kind of a whole bunch of puffy, spiky petals that and so just with a couple little marks and stuff, then you're starting on your way to do something like that. Now, another thing that you can do, I have this is called Yupo, and it's also made by the same company that makes Stonehenge. Is this the Yupo? No, this is not the Yupo. I don't know what happened to my Yupo. All right, I had a sheet of Yupo someplace, I guess that's on the floor someplace. But anyhow, it's like a piece of plastic. And even if you don't have Yupo is nice because it's like a real thin sheet of plastic, but a regular piece of paper. then if you want, you could do the same trick with this. You could put it on a scrap piece of paper, or again, that Yupo. Okay, and I can pick up the pigment here. So instead of having to go directly full force onto my paper with my brush pen here, then I can test it out on a scrap piece, and then I could come in and then put a much thinner layer down. So you can either work directly on, again, we're talking about pigments, so we'll continue working with pigs. He's impressed by how great these markers are. So if I want to go back into that, then I can just kind of, instead of trying to get it directly, I can do it on another piece of paper, get it to water out. I could add, maybe some other colors. Let's see, I'll get the red. Yeah, let's get the green. And I actually sometimes kind of like going over the lines so that they bleed just a little bit. You still have a very strong sense of where they are. But if they just bleed out a little bit, sometimes that has a nice effect. And you can work them like watercolors, especially with the Stonehenge. The Stonehenge or other similar papers have sizing in them. And if you're not familiar with what sizing is, it's what paper is made with, and often it's just coated on the paper, and it kind of protects the fibers of the paper from immediately absorbing the pigment. So that way, if you want to maybe go over and get those to flush out a little bit more, you can do that because it hasn't been totally soaked up yet by the paper. Eventually, everything dries and it becomes more permanent, but the more the paper is sized, the longer it gives you to make decisions about, I don't know if I like that. You can pick stuff up a little bit easier when you have sizing rather than paper that has very little sizing. So all of the Legion papers are very nicely sized, and so that makes them much more, have a wider range of the different effects that you can do. All right, now to go back to the pencils, the Polychromos, to continue talking about their features, they're all stamped. They have their number. They've got the name for it. They are made with cedar that is imported from California. And this is a perfect wood for a pencil. And so it gives you a really nice, sharp point. They're fastidious about making sure that the leads are totally in the center of the pencils, whether it's a Polychromos pencil, whether it's a graphite pencil, or whether it is Albrecht Dürer pencil, Polychromos, they're all the same. And so that when you sharpen the pencil, you'll get a point that's right in the center. Now, I don't know, there are other pencils that I've used where you sharpen the point, and then all of a sudden, half the point is wood, and the other part is the pigment. And that is using, pencils where the lead's a little bit off center. And so that's what you end up doing. But these, you can pretty much guarantee that every one that you have will be in the center. And the finish that they put, matches very nicely, as you would expect. But this varnish that they use to finish the pencils is water soluble. And they've been doing this for decades. They were one of the first companies to start thinking about pollution and going green and all that. So for quite a few years, well before it was, popular, fashionable, or the thing to do, it always has been the thing to do, but It's just now happening. It's a water-soluble varnish on it so that they're very aware of those ecological things. Okay, so we've kind of talked about the features of the individual materials, the Polychromos. Again, just a real fast review. They're oil-based. They come in 120 colors. They're very soft. You can use them in a very light application or a heavy application because they're oil-based. When you build them up, they don't chip off, and you can keep on going and going and going till the cows, or in this case, the pigs come home. The Albrecht Dürer watercolor pencils are every bit, the same, except for instead of being oil-based, they're water-based. So it gives you an opportunity not only to use them as a color pencil, but if you add water to them, then you can also explore watercolor effects with them. And then the watercolor markers have 2 points. One's a brush pen and one's a more like a bullet point. Now, in the case of both these markers, Albrecht Dürer markers, and especially the pencils, never dip them in water. A lot of people think, oh, well, I could really get kind of some interesting effects if I dip my pencil in the water. And you can, you actually can. But what happens is that the water wicks into the barrel and it'll rot out quite a bit of the pencil. So in the process of doing that one thing, you may have to sharpen all the way halfway down to get over the negative effects of dipping it in the water. So you want to make sure that you don't do that. Yeah, as we go along, I might remind you if you have any questions, if you need a little more explanation or something about anything that we've talked about, then just put it up in the chat room and somebody will ask me the question and we'll push on. Okay.
And that's good timing, Franz. We're about halfway through.
Okay, good. All right. So the one thing that I also haven't mentioned, I did mention the knead eraser, which is floating around here. Once I get demonstrating, I get so piled up with that. But I want to talk a little bit more about that as well. So if I have an area, let me just go ahead and sharpen this. Okay, so then I'll make a little more solid here. Now, if I were to make subtle changes, I can take my knead eraser, depending on how much I want to erase. I could erase, a good part of it with this. So I can lighten it up, but still keep a trace there. All right. Actually, maybe yeah, this is good. Now, the knead eraser, as I mentioned, once you use it, especially with graphite, you can just somehow that graphite disappears. I don't know how it works. I think part of it is that because the eraser is slightly sticky, it just kind of holds graphite in there and will pick more up rather than disperse some. All right. And then the vinyl eraser. And the vinyl eraser is made for more vigorous activity. So if I really use a lot of pressure, I can actually kind of use it as a drawing tool. So then, I've got this kind of nice ghost kind of white shape running through there. And then if I take like a yellow pencil and kind of put over, then I get kind of an orangish and maybe fade that out a little bit as it comes up. And again, you've got all these different little techniques you can use in case you have to enhance something or unless you want to kind of simulate something that is, full blown. And then, a lot of times I think in the example of my drawing here, you could, well, I just added a little bit to the drawing. I'll take care of that later. Because I've luckily I sprayed this with some fixative. So anyhow, in some of these areas, you have a feeling for the highlight because it's a little bit brighter, a little bit lighter application. And then, I added just a little bit of shading on top of that to get that. But part of this was also accomplished by taking an eraser and picking a little of that up. And that in a highlight, and this is a good example too, that sometimes we have a really bright light, it bleaches out the color. So if you look at this kind of purple stripe here compared to here, this is in kind of regular lighting. This is in more of the spotlight. So you kind of lose the intensity of the color. So that's kind of what's happening, in an instance like, kind of in through here, that if you pick some of it up, or if you don't put as much down, then that could easily be kind of a highlighted area as it then rolls into an area that is regularly lighted. And then with because I can overlap these and get effects like a shadow, instead of using black. I mean, black would have been nice to have added to the kit, but I was afraid that, it would kind of discourage you from making things up with a combination of colors. Black can be a little harsh at times. So if I want to get kind of a shadow effect here, then I can really load this up with the blue on top of the red, and then on top of the yellow, and then as it kind of comes up, get rid of the blue and just let that filter through. So then you get the idea that this definitely is out of the light. This is pretty much in the light, and then this is in highlight. So you have all these different things you can do with the same material. And so they take on lots of roles and they help you be able to kind of interpret your own artistic vision. And I've hoped up to this point that you can see, okay, you can work realistically with these materials and they can be very effective, or in the case of like what I had showed you in the sketchbook, is which the way I like to work most of the time. You can do that and everything in between. So it's just no, right or wrong thing to be doing. It's just, here are the characteristics of the materials. This is how can you use them. Now find out how they're going to relate to what you want to do, or, just play around with them. And you may find out that in playing with the materials, it'll give you some ideas of what you want to do. All right, now that we're at the halfway place, we're going to go into doing a multimedia project. And what I'm doing more and more in the Zooms that I do, I kind of like coming up with some kind of a project that also teaches you something else, something that you could use with just about any kind of material. So I thought, since it's getting to be Christmas, that we do a little pop-up structure. And I'll show you how to do this is so simple. This is so simple and it is so much fun. And what I like about it, it kind of evokes 3 dimensions and you're creating your own little space. And so I get lost in my own world enough as it is. But when I start making these pop-ups, then, I'm creating these environments where I start thinking, oh, it'd be cool to have a house here. And let's have a, Santa coming up here and all that kind of stuff. So we'll move to that. Now, what I have done, this is like the standard size sheet of the Stonehenge, and I just kind of cut it. I didn't measure it. I just kind of eyeballed it. So this is going to be some scrap paper I'm going to use for the different figures, and this is going to be the structure. And I'm going to fold this in half, and I mean, you could use just, your whole sheet of paper just as it is, and it just would be wider. But I kind of like this more squarish format for some reason. It's my own aesthetic choice. I get a lot of pleasure out of doing that. So you end up with a right angle. Okay. Now I'm going to take my scissors and I'm going to be thinking, well, I don't know what I'm going to do. We'll find out. That's some of the fun of it. You just go as you proceed, it tells you what to do. Okay, so this is the folded part of the paper. And you can mark this if you want. I've gotten pretty used to doing it. So I am going to make one cut perpendicular to the folded edge. Maybe go in just a little farther. And then I'm going to make a parallel cut about 3/4 of an inch. Okay, so that's what we've got. Now, when you open this up, punch what I call the nose forward, grab it near the crease, and really, what I'm doing is really pinching that, and then pull it, keep on pulling it until I close it, and then when it looks like they're matched on top of each other, and if you want to, you could take like one of your round Polychromos. You could use a bone folder, which is a tool that they use in bookbinding. But I find that, pencil do the same thing. So now when you open it up, you have this little platform. And when I stand the card up, and then I a little strap here. If I take double stick tape, if I take glue dots, if I take paste, whatever, and attach it to the front, then I have the structure for it to stand up. Now, the one thing that you want to watch out for, in this case, I don't think I have to worry, but if you don't want things, when you close this up, if you don't want things sticking out over through here, you have to figure out how tall this can be. And that's very easy. Like if I have a piece of paper here, put it up like that, close it up, I can make a mark here. So anything that is that tall from the bottom to that mark, I can put right here. And as I close it up, it's not going to be sticking out above the card. Okay, so I thought, all right, what kind of scene? Well, usually what I do now is start thinking about the background. And that I think is where these will come in handy. All right, because they're watercolor and they have kind of a softer, and I don't know if I'm a real fan of Walt Disney's 1930s cartoons. And the animated films, I especially like the cartoons, but a technique that they used was to have the background watercolored. And they had just gorgeous backgrounds, really gorgeous backgrounds that are all watercolored, very beautiful and very kind of natural looking. And then the figures themselves have a black outline or very flat, and they just have solid color. And what happens is that gets the figures to pop out of the background a little bit more effectively. And it's a technique that I have adopted for my own work when I do the pop-ups, where the background scene generally is mostly something that's kind of made up of, you can kind of see in the sky, especially. I mean, this is all just kind of watercolor look. And so then the figures that I put in front, whether it's a black line, a blue line, purple line, whatever, they kind of stand out a little bit more stylistically because they're a little crisper, more crisply defined, and not quite as loosely watercolored. So I figured that's kind of an approach. And, since it's actually, we are working with, kind of maybe crispness ideas. So what I'm going to do is like, I usually kind of sketch maybe very lightly. Now this is the Polychromos. So whatever I kind of sketch in here, I could erase, but for the most part, if I put like a water media or something like that down on that, it's not going to blend out or anything. Okay, and then I'm going to come across here a little bit maybe. And then, okay. This is going to be a little, what I'm doing here now. Of course, I'm doing this very light, so you may not be able to see, but what I'm doing is creating kind of an environment. And I'm thinking more of like up in the North Pole or someplace like that, that has ice flows and stuff like that. So we'll have maybe another one off here because I have another way of kind of showing you how you can, and some bits of ice here on the, Okay. Now, again, what I'm going to do is take a scrap piece of paper. I'll use this one, I guess. So I'm going to get some purple here because I don't want it to be too intense. So now I'm going to kind of start filling in this kind of watery area.
Franz, while you're working through that, there's a question from Shirley. She's
Sure.
asking if you can speak to this, how do these pencils compare with Prismacolor?
Well, I think the biggest, all right, I'll tell you why I chose. I know that this summer I did a presentations for the American Color Pencil Society. No, it's the Color Pencil Society of America. And I would say it was kind of split between Prismacolor aficionados and Faber-Castell. And so everybody did beautiful work. But what I like about the Faber-Castell pencils are that they're the oil-based rather than wax-based. And so I don't need a special blender to try to cut that wax down so I can keep on building up. I like being able to layer with the pencils, the Polychromos, one color on top of the other, on the other top of the other, without having to worry about that issue. And the other thing too is that I found that even when I was a student, ancient years ago, when I was using Prismacolor, the leads often fell out of them. I'm glad you asked that question because I forgot to mention that every pencil that Faber-Castell makes is glued along the entire barrel. It's called SV bonding. So when they make a pencil, they've got these slats and they have grooves in them, and they put the leads in the grooves and they put another slat. So they kind of make a lead sandwich, whether it's color or graphite lead. And they glue that together. And then when they glue it together, the glue is on they glue that lead completely along the entire barrel. Prismacolor and other pencils spot glue them. So when you think about the millions of pencils they make, they probably save a good amount of money by saving glue. So spotted glue is less expensive than the whole thing. But what happens is that if you accidentally drop your pencil and the lead breaks someplace, if it falls between two glue spots, you're going to lose the entire length of pencil when you go to sharpen. I don't know if you've experienced this, but you go to sharpen your pencil and all of a sudden the lead falls out. That's because the lead has not been glued in along the entire barrel. So the Faber-Castell, you hit the spot where there's a crack and you might lose, just where the crack is, and then the rest of the pencil is totally good. So, and also I have had lots of their pencils when I go to sharpen them. That was, what I was thinking about when I said, have you ever had a pencil that you sharpen, you get wood on one side and and the pigment on the other. So they have the Faber-Castell has reliably light fast pigments. And I also like the color coordination between, I've got a Polychromos pencil, I've got an Albrecht pencil, a Dürer pencil, I've got a soft pastel. They have other markers called pit markers, which are like an India ink formulation. They're very similar to the watercolor markers, except for instead of watercolor, they're permanent, like colored India ink. And so because they're all of this index system, that means if I'm doing some kind of multimedia project like we're going to be doing here, then I can be sure that if I'm mixing these media together, they're going to be all the same red, and it's not going to look weird because there's one red, then I put a totally different red on top of it and whatnot. So I like the idea that they've got a unified pigment system. I like the premium quality. I like the fact that they glue the whole way. I like the light, fast pigments and the finish. The other thing that I like about it too is that when you buy these pencils, they come sharpened. And so I mean, to me, that in itself is reason to buy these things because you don't have to spend your entire afternoon sharpening pencils when you first buy them. And they're also finished nicely in terms of they have the end, one end is finished. So you know that you sharpen this end. I found that, when I had the Prismacolors, a lot of times I didn't pay attention. I sharpened the wrong end, so I didn't know what color it was because I'd sharpened that off. So those are, among the reasons that I like the Faber-Castell materials better than the Prismacolor. But there are tons of people that use Prismacolor and they get good results. So, I think a lot of it is to personal preference, but that's the reason I like them. That help?
Yeah, that was great. Thank you.
Yeah, yeah. Okay, so anyhow, let's get back to the water here. All right, so I'll try to speed things up a little bit because I know that I don't want to run out of time before you kind of see how the whole thing works together. So I'll speed this up a little bit. Okay, so this is, and by all means, try this out for yourself. Go ahead and grab some of your materials and, don't worry about, doing a masterpiece. Just have some fun here. Okay, so we got that. And then let's do another kind of purplish sky up here. And so again, what I'm trying to do is get a much more soft background. And then when it comes to putting our figures in, I'll have a little bit of kind of might be clouds or something, or just uneven, but then, it kind of help define where our little snow mounds are. And then maybe, okay. All right, so that's the beginning of it. Let's then kind of, maybe we can do some northern lights here. Green there. And also, the one thing I would recommend is that, if you are doing multimedia projects, I mean, I'm kind of under time constraint here, but usually I make sure that everything is dry before I get to the next level. Because if I try to immediately go into this wet area with polychromos, I could be tearing the surface of the paper or messing around with it. I mean, kind of doing some damage. Okay, so with these kind of yellow Aurora Borealis, then I'm going to kind of come up here on the slopes, put a little yellow reflecting the. I want that dry a little bit. Okay, now let's get back into the polychromos, and then what I'm going to do is, this is dry enough that you can see that I can make it look a little bit darker by putting blue here. I'll really bring that out. And then maybe down here, this is more in a valley, so it'd be more like kind of blue shadow. I want to kind of avoid going up there right away because it's still kind of wet. Okay. But then I live in Western Pennsylvania, and I am broadcasting from an old country church that was built in 1883, and it's in the snow belt. And when I came home from visiting my daughter, I had 14 inches of snow. But what I like about all that snow is that when the sun starts going down, I look out in the backyard and there are these drifts and stuff. And anything that faces me, which is away from the sun, is this really beautiful, cool blue color. And then anything that is reflecting the sunlight that is sinking, it's this gorgeous kind of orange, pinkish color. So I got to try to throw cool blue against the warm here. Now, if I overlap the yellow with the blue, then I get, a little color here. Okay. So I think you get the idea. Define this ice flow a little bit more. So now I'm using a little more pressure, getting more of an opaque layer of blue to really make it kind of stand out from the weaker watercolor effect. Okay, normally I would keep on working on it, but I think that that will give you, basic idea of maybe build up your background first. Now, what I'm going to do. So again, want to make sure that when I put this figure here, when I paste it, it's not going to stick over when I close the card. So as long as I stay underneath that line, I'm safe. Mm. Okay, now I use the Albrecht markers. Now I'm going to put this on a little bit lighter so that it kind of gives a feeling for the shadow here. I should have done down there. I wasn't thinking correctly there. A little shading on that little pom-pom like that. Maybe what I can do is make some of these darker by putting a blue on top. That maybe darker that way again. Yeah, that worked. We'll give him blue eyes. Okay. A yellow beak here. Okay, this is the Albrecht Dürer. So maybe just because it's a little bit wet, it'll help kind of soften that up a little bit, and we'll give him. I kind of figure since red and green will make our penguin green. Okay, so these are the darkest part. Okay. I can use my Albrecht Dürer pencil to kind of come up with a slightly lighter green. Yeah, maybe resort to the marker here for his feet. Okay, when that dries, let's get our okay. We will pretend that this is dry. And kind of get a more of an orangey look to his feet. Okay, where's the purple? Purple's here. And put like a little bit of purple shadow. Especially like this when I get it to kind of flow out. That's kind of a nice shadow. And I'm going to use a little of this purple. I'll pick up from here and start coming through and kind of putting a little shadow in a couple of areas. Help. Okay. Again, I don't want to belabor this. Now you can either just kind of put it in as a rectangle, or I'm going to cut it.
Okay, and we are at the 15-minute mark.
Okay,
We
let me
do
just,
also
all right, let me
have,
just, okay. You can cut it right to the edge if you want. I'll just do a very fast trim job here so you can see what it looks like when it's kind of assembled.
while
Okay,
you're working on
double,
that, Franz, we do have a question
yes.
from Marilyn. She's asking, how are the Faber-Castell gold Faber made? And what is the difference between Polychromos and gold Faber?
Gold Faber, what's interesting is that they used to have a line that they called the blue line. And it was like student grade, that type of thing. Um, but it was a completely different lead. And they decided that they always want to try to give everybody the best quality as they possibly can. So what happens with like gold Faber pencils, it's the same lead that is more or less the same makeup, same pigment as the polychromos, but the diameter is thinner. So let's say you have quarter inch. I mean, that's more than, but just to make the numbers easier to work with, let's say that the polychromos is a quarter-inch diameter, then the gold Faber pencils are 3/16. So you're not getting as much of the colored lead, but it's the same lead, so it's the same quality. And then the other thing is that instead of using the high grade cedar, they use another better grade wood, but it isn't quite as premium as the cedar. And then other than that, that's, the same color indexing, they'll fit in with the same things. So if you want to, you can kind of get some, you can mix and match and they will work as well. So it's, it's a good value for students, for beginners, because it's still the same high quality, but you just get less of it. Does that make sense? Okay.
Yeah, thank you.
Yeah. So what I'm going to do now is I am going to put my, let's see if I can do this so you can see. All right. It's just, I've got a piece of double stick tape. Okay. And so then, we can imagine it'd be a little more effective if they were totally cut out, but he's standing there. Now, if I want to add another one, I could put another nose here and very quickly, because I don't, well, it's a little bit of time for question time. You can also cut little strips. If you don't like the hole that you get the notch in the back, you can just make a little device here that does the same thing without cutting a hole. So I can glue that there and glue it against the back. And then I have the same, I don't know if you get, there we go. I've got the same device and it will fold down. So you just have to tape it or glue it to the back and then glue it to the bottom. And then it'll collapse the same way that everything else. And I think what I like the most about it, I just like the idea that it's flat and you open up and all of a sudden you got this whole scene and this whole environment. So you could add some other things. And then one last really quick trip on the one that I did with the Santa Claus. If you notice that he's up here, it flattens out fine. When you close it, he pops back up. And that's because I made a paper spring. And that's just a matter of taking 2 strips. I learned this in kindergarten and I've been using it ever since. You make these little paper springs. So you just have perpendicular motion and you just fold one piece on top of the other. And then you decide, okay, how far do I want it to stick out? So let's say that's fast and far enough. Then I'd put a little bit of piece of tape between the front and the back, and it holds it together. And so then that way you can see the way it compresses and then it pops out and compresses. So if I want like a moon or something up here, attach it there, and then when I collapse it, it'll also work. All right. Any questions or?
No questions so far.
Okay, well, I mean, I could keep on working here. If you think of any, let's maybe put a big moon or something up there at the top. I think the more that you work on your stuff, if you use good materials, it's like opening the door to creativity. And I guess the best example that I use, for a while, I illustrated kids' books and book covers for Doubleday. I lived in Philadelphia. I'd go up to New York, and this was before computers. So I couldn't email stuff. I couldn't text. I'd have to physically take everything up. And it was a completely different system back then than we have now. But at any rate, oh, I got so busy telling you about what I did, and now I forget what the point of the story is. So I'm sorry about that. We're talking about taking things up, and I did kids' books. Oh, I'm so sorry. That's one of those moments where just I was focusing on taping and forgot what I was thinking about. I'm sure it was something very important. Okay, so we'll make a little crescent moon.
And just a heads up, in a couple of minutes,
Okay, all right,
we do
so
like to do a show and tell. So just be aware we can turn our cameras on in a few minutes and we can do a little
yeah, go
share.
ahead. Let's do that.
Okay. Yeah. So
Yeah, I
if
mean,
you guys want, go ahead. You can put your screen on gallery view in the view settings in Zoom, and then go ahead and show us on your camera what you've done. I'm going to see too. Let's see. Anybody want to share?
okay,
Marianne?
sure. It's a horrible moon, but
No?
he had a rough
Oh,
winter.
there we go.
He's had a rough winter.
Nice. Awesome.
I
Marianne
usually
down there.
have
Thank
fish
you so
jumping
much.
out. You could do that, but again, it's like you just create your own little environment.
That's so great. I really like the mixed media technique of this, where you can mix the different textures you get from the markers and then the pencils.
Yeah, that's especially what I like. And then, now that this is nice and dry, I can kind of come back, and if I want to, I can start picking up, little edges and little textures. And just imagine what you can do if you have a full range of colors. You've got 120 of everything, 30 of the Albrecht Dürer markers and stuff. So you can kind of come back, and you the watercolor is good for soaking the paper and creating a ground. Let that dry, then go on top of it with your other ones. And there are a variety of other, like, one thing, if we just stay on for 1 second more, I totally forgot about this.
Oh yeah, we got a few minutes, no worries. This is
Yeah.
great.
Um, on black paper, Faber-Castell has the pit pens, which are, similar to a black one that's what I use to make the black lines for the pop-up book. Um, so on black paper, what I like, let's say we're going to do a snowman. Okay. Again, we'll just kind of do a quick version here. So once this white pit pen dries a little bit, it gets on the paper, it kind of disappears. It's just a real light line. So I can use that to my advantage so that if I want to start working with, we'll just do the head so that so he's starting to emerge a little bit. Okay, and then maybe a little highlight in his hat.
Franz, I do have a question. It's a little specific to you. Do you have go-to colors for a palette that you normally use in your
I'll
work?
tell you, if you look at my watercolor palette, all of the warm colors are almost down to the bottom of the pans, and all the browns and cool colors look like they're almost brand new. So I have a tendency to gravitate to very warm colors more than anything else. Okay, now I got the first part done. So if I go over here again and a couple times, you can see how that becomes brighter. And so any part of this snowman let's say that the light's coming from this direction. And then I'll let it kind of just fade out for the rest of it. I can get a little shadow from my hat by not quite going over there. Let that dry a little bit. and put another layer. And so the more that I build this up, the wider it gets. And so I'm starting to develop a sense of volume by kind of reverse shading. Okay, let that dry for a little bit. Now, the other thing that they make now is a double-ended paint marker. This is acrylic paint. You just got to kind of, have a real fine point, and they got a bigger point. So for anything that I want to be a real highlight, I can put this in here like this. Okay, I'm going to try to speed this up. So now you can kind of see the way that things are starting to form a little bit. I can put like a little highlight on the coal bits. Now, as soon as that dries, I'll show you another trick. Okay, so what I'm doing is I'm developing the white of the snowman. Could have done the whole body, which I probably should have just to be more effective with it. Here, let's just do a little bit more here. The rim of his hat. Maybe a little here catching some light. Not totally black. Get a highlight. They also make slightly bigger versions of this. Okay, so then take this again and use. Okay, now, once this is dry, I don't have an I do. I can take this water-soluble Albrecht marker, and I can go over, and because this is transparent, that it kind of picks up the same value. Here, maybe it'll probably show up a little bit better if I bring it up. Okay.
Yeah, that's great.
It's almost like priming a canvas. So here I've got this black piece of paper. I've been able to use the white markers to get the form to emerge by putting the highlights in. Because when you think about it, it's opposite. If you're working on a white piece of paper, you already have the highlights. You have a whole page of highlights. And so the idea is to cover the page with pigment, graphite, whatever, to cover up what's not a highlight. With the black, you start with the shadows, and you're adding more white and more white to finally build up to the highlights. And the shadows are already there. So what I like about working like this is that it's more dramatic. It makes the figure emerge from the background. It's like if you have an actor on the stage performing Hamlet's soliloquy, they turn all the lights out except for the spot. And he's there glowing against the background. He's emerged, and it's much more dramatic, I think. And so that's what I like about working on black paper so much. And these markers, I mean, if I do it on the black paper, you can't even, once it dries, you can't even see it. But if I prime it first with, like a nice layer of either one of these white markers, this is the acrylic paint, and this is the water soluble. I mean, this is like more. The pit pens are formulated with into ink so that once they dry, they become permanent. But if you catch them when they're still fresh, you can move them around a little bit with water. But as soon as that dries, then I can go over that with even yellow. Not quite dry yet. Well, we'll pretend it is. But you can see that obviously, yeah, that's a nice yellow against black. Yet if I do that on the black itself, it may have flash yellow to begin with, but then when it fades, you can barely see it. I mean, that's pretty subtle there, but it's still there. Let's see if I want to make his hat band yellow, then I just kind of come in like that. And because I have less of the white pigment here, it looks darker. So I'm using the same marker, but it gives the illusion that's going from a bright yellow to a darker yellow across. So I find working on black paper with these materials really, really great. So I can come
Yeah,
back and
that's great.
kind of.
So again, he's using the Albrecht Dürer watercolor markers, and then he used the Pitt pen to make the white come out. I don't think we have the paint markers at Plaza just yet, but we definitely have all the Pitt pens, which are really nice to have.
Yeah,
Um,
these are
there's a
really
really great selection, and we are running out of time. It looks like. But this was really great. I love this trick that you showed at the end. I wasn't expecting that. That's a really cool thing to prime the surface.
yes. Yeah, it's essentially
Yes.
just kind of turning black paper to white paper so you can get color on it.
Yeah. Awesome. So I'm going to switch you to your uh, face view, Franz, and we can
Okay.
go ahead and close this out. Thank you so much for joining us. You've been with us several times, and it's always good to have you back.
That's always fun. I've always enjoyed it.
Great. Awesome. Thank you guys so much for coming. Hope you all have a really great holiday and just see you on the next one and see you next year. Thank you, Franz and everyone. Have
Happy
a good
holidays, everybody.